In the heart of London, where centuries of tradition stand as unbreakable as the palace walls themselves, a lone royal guard kept watch, stoic, disciplined, a symbol of unwavering duty. But on that summer afternoon, something no training could prepare him for approached. A fragile girl with a bright pink dress, a thin oxygen tube, and a small plush lion clutched to her chest. She didn't come to challenge him or make him smile for a photo. She came because she believed even the strictest traditions might find room for kindness. In that single silent moment, every eye turned to the guard. Would he break the centuries-old code to comfort a child? Or would he stand frozen in the name of duty? Before we reveal the full story of compassion that defied history, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. The summer sun hung low over London, casting a warm, honeyed glow over Buckingham Palace's grand iron gates. Tourists gathered in clusters near the forecourt, their cameras raised, eager to capture a piece of history. The air hummed with excited chatter in a dozen languages, French, Japanese, Spanish, blending into a single, lively symphony. Children on school trips wore brightly colored hats, giggling and pointing at the changing of the guard banners, while parents tried to herd them toward a better view. A street musician played a gentle melody on his violin, notes drifting lazily across the crowd. In the middle of this bustling scene stood Lance Corporal Thomas Whitaker, 28 years old, proud and resolute in his ceremonial uniform. His scarlet tunic, pressed to perfection, caught the light as if deflecting the sun itself. A tall black bearskin hat crowned his head, its shadow obscuring the faint lines of concentration on his face. His white gloves rested atop his rifle, held at the correct angle, a silent testament to centuries of disciplined service. Thomas's posture was unwavering. He was the picture of tradition, a living statue, every muscle trained to ignore the noise and distractions that swirled around him. His eyes remained fixed forward, unfocused yet alert, his breathing steady. He'd spent countless hours perfecting this stillness, each second an echo of the generations of guards who had stood watch before him. But beneath the rigid discipline, Thomas felt a subtle tension in the air. Today wasn't just another routine shift. A parade of dignitaries was expected later, an event that demanded even greater precision and composure. Rumors had spread among the ranks of a special visitor, someone important enough to warrant extra vigilance. Though the specifics remained classified, Thomas could sense the collective anticipation in the shifting of the crowd and the low murmur among the nearby policemen. Yet, for all the protocol and solemnity, Thomas remained human. Inside his mind, memories flickered. His father, a proud guardsman who taught him to polish his boots until they gleamed like mirrors. His mother, who always told him that a guard's strength was measured not just by his stillness, but by his compassion. He remembered the times when children, small and curious, had waved at him. How he'd wanted to smile back, to break the stone-faced facade, just for a moment, but he never had, not until now. A small breeze teased the edge of his tunic, carrying with it the scent of street food and the sweetness of summer flowers from the nearby gardens. He felt the weight of his position, the centuries-old tradition that demanded unyielding discipline. And yet, a quiet part of him yearned to reach beyond that barrier, to remind himself that beneath the uniform, he was still a man. At that very moment, he caught a flicker of movement among the crowd, a group approaching, slower than the rest. His eyes remained forward, but a subtle shift of his peripheral vision told him this was different, a presence unlike any other. And though his training demanded he remain stoic, a feeling stirred in his chest, a premonition that today, something would challenge everything he knew about what it meant to be a royal guard. Thomas held his posture, eyes forward, as the slow approach of the group caught the edges of his vision. A hush seemed to follow them, like a respectful shadow, and the usual buzz of laughter and chatter faded into something softer, something almost reverent. A family moved at a deliberate pace, a man in his late 30s, tall with weary eyes and a protective hand on the shoulder of the woman beside him. She, with a gentle face etched with worry, guided their daughter forward. The girl couldn't have been older than 8, her steps small and careful, as if each one required all her strength. She wore a bright pink dress with little daisies on the hem and a matching headscarf that framed her pale, delicate face. A small plush toy, a lion with a frayed mane, hung from her hand like a lifeline. The toy's fur was worn smooth from countless nights of clinging to it in dark hospital rooms. Thomas's gaze remained fixed ahead, but his mind noted every detail with a soldier's instinct. The slight tremble in the girl's hands, the determined tilt of her chin, the way her mother's arm tightened around her waist whenever the girl paused to catch her breath. An oxygen tube peeked from beneath the scarf, its thin plastic line trailing discreetly to a small portable tank in her mother's tote. Even with all the signs of her illness, pale skin, the careful shuffle of her feet, her eyes were bright and searching, scanning the guards as if looking for a sign, a spark, something that could bridge the distance between tradition and tenderness. The crowd began to sense that this moment was different. Conversations fell silent. Cameras were lowered. Even the street musician paused his bow mid-stroke, his violin boa suspended in a quiet tremor. Whispers rustled through the crowd like wind through leaves. "Do you think he'll look at her? Poor little thing. She's so brave." Thomas felt the weight of those whispers pressing into the small of his back, a reminder that every movement of his was watched, measured, and remembered. The rules, the centuries-old code that said, no movement, no speaking, no acknowledgement. Yet beneath that code lived the simple, undeniable truth that he was human, and so was she. He watched the girl's slow progress, each step a small victory. The mother's hand gently urged her on, her voice low and soothing, though Thomas couldn't hear the words. The father's posture was tense, protective but resigned. He seemed torn between shielding his daughter from disappointment and letting her believe in the possibility of a miracle. Thomas's heart clenched. In his mind, he replayed the countless times children had waved at him, laughed at his stoic expression, or tried to provoke a reaction with funny faces or silly dances. Those moments had always tested his discipline, but none had felt like this. This girl wasn't here to tease or to challenge. She was here because hope brought her, and in that hope lay a fragile, powerful bridge between her world and his. He wrestled with the knowledge that any response, any gesture, would be a direct violation of his oath. The thought of disappointing the girl, the fear in her parents' eyes, burned at the edges of his composure. Yet, deep inside, a voice whispered that sometimes the uniform wasn't enough, that sometimes compassion had to find its way through the armor. The girl paused a few steps away from Thomas, her small face turned upward, her eyes wide and searching. She held her plush lion a little higher, as if to show it to him, a silent plea for a connection. Thomas could feel the tension in the air, every tourist holding their breath. His training screamed for him to stay still. Yet, against all the rigid lines of protocol, he felt something shift inside him. A quiet, powerful reminder that even the strongest soldier must remember what it means to be human. Thomas's gaze remained fixed ahead, but every muscle in his body felt the tension of the moment. The girl's small steps brought her closer, her plush lion clutched tightly to her chest. She looked up at him, eyes wide and shining, her lips parting as if to speak, though no words came. Instead, her gaze seemed to ask a question he'd heard 1,000 times from tourists. "Will you smile at me? Will you see me?" The mother, standing a half step behind her daughter, laid a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Go on, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. The father stood just behind them, his jaw clenched, hands balled into fists at his sides, as if ready to step forward to shield his daughter from disappointment. Thomas's heart thundered in his chest. He'd spent years training himself to ignore distractions, the jeers of tourists, the snapping of cameras, the clamor of 100 languages demanding his attention. But this was different. The girl wasn't challenging him. She wasn't seeking entertainment. She was seeking something far deeper, a connection, a moment of humanity that would remind her she was seen, even in the face of her illness. His training pressed down on him like a lead weight. The Queen's Guard must remain stoic, unflinching, a symbol of unwavering duty. To move, to acknowledge, was to shatter centuries of tradition. Yet the human part of him, the part his mother had always nurtured, screamed to step forward, to bridge the gap between ceremony and compassion. He could see the girl's fingers trembling as she clutched her lion. Her eyes were too big for her face, dark shadows underlining the exhaustion that no child should ever have to bear. Yet, There was a spark there, too, a fierce, unyielding spirit that refused to surrender to the darkness that threatened her from within. Thomas's eyes softened, a subtle shift so small it might have gone unnoticed by all but the girl. His training roared in protest, but he let the humanity show for just a moment. The girl's lips curved into a small, hopeful smile, her eyes widening in wonder. She shifted her weight forward, holding the plush lion higher, as if to show him. Her mother's breath hitched, the sound of tears held back by sheer will. The father's shoulders slumped, a silent surrender to the moment unfolding before him. The tourists around them leaned in, cameras lowered, as if understanding that this wasn't a moment to capture on film, but one to witness in reverence. A single tear escaped the corner of Thomas's eye. It traced a slow, silent path down his cheek, hidden mostly by the shadow of his bearskin hat. It was an act so small, so human, that it didn't need words. The girl's eyes caught the tear, and she pressed her lips together, as if holding in a giggle of pure wonder. In that single tear, centuries of tradition bent, but did not break. Thomas felt the weight of his duty, but also the power of compassion. He was a royal guard, sworn to stand unflinching. But he was also a man whose heart could not ignore the silent plea in a child's eyes. For a long, quiet moment, the two of them remained frozen in that delicate exchange. The sound of a distant drumbeat from inside the palace reminded Thomas of the world beyond this moment, but it felt far away, as if the universe had decided to pause and let this fragile connection stand on its own. He could feel the girl's strength radiating toward him, small but fierce, like a candle defying the wind. He realized then that she wasn't asking for a break in protocol, or for him to abandon his duty. She was simply asking to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be remembered, and in that, he found the strength to do what his training had always told him he couldn't. Thomas inhaled deeply, letting the air fill his lungs as if to steady himself. The girl's smile grew wider, her small hand trembling, but reaching toward him, her plush lion dangling at her side. He felt the pull of the moment, the centuries of history behind him, the weight of every guardsman who had come before. And yet, with a simple shift of his eyes, with a single tear, he had given her something no protocol could forbid: humanity. The crowd's silence deepened, a reverent hush falling over the plaza. It was as if the entire world had paused to witness this moment, a bridge between the ancient and the innocent, between the uniform and the human heart. Thomas felt a warmth in his chest, a flicker of pride that he'd never known before. For in that instant, he had shown that even the most disciplined soldier could find the strength to be human when it mattered most. Thomas felt his heart thud louder than the muffled footsteps of tourists along the pavement. Every instinct drilled into him screamed to remain still, to hold the line between duty and emotion. Yet his gaze remained on the girl's small hand as it hovered, tremulous and hopeful, at the edge of the air that separated them. With a subtle breath, one that would have escaped the notice of most, he shifted his weight. His left knee bent, barely an inch, a movement so small it might have seemed like a trick of the light. Yet to those who watched, it was a world cracking open, a movement, a bend in the shield of discipline that surrounded him. The girl's eyes widened, her lips parting in a soft gasp of wonder. She looked at her parents as if to say, "Did you see that?" He moved. Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears, her hands coming up to cover her mouth. The father, usually stoic and solid, let his eyes soften with a pride that few words could capture. Thomas, now closer to her eye level, extended his right hand in a slow, deliberate gesture. His white glove, pristine, the mark of a soldier who cared deeply for his uniform, contrasted starkly with the small, worn lion she held. He opened his palm, inviting, offering. The girl's fingers trembled as she reached out, the moment stretching on a thread of silence. Her hand, so small it seemed fragile as porcelain, pressed gently into his. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to vanish. The tourists, the cameras, the history, all of it fell away until it was only her and him, a royal guard and a little girl who had already braved more than most soldiers ever would. His voice, when it came, was so soft it might have been carried away by the wind, but she heard it. "Stay strong, little one," he said, each word a careful gift. "You're braver than any of us." The girl's lips trembled, her eyes glistening. She clutched her plush lion to her chest, but her other hand remained in his, as if to draw strength from his steadiness. A smile bloomed on her face, small but bright, like the first ray of sun after a storm. Her mother wept silently, tears streaming down her cheeks as she reached for her husband's arm. The father's jaw tightened, then relaxed, his eyes finding Thomas's. He nodded, a silent thank you that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Around them, the crowd stood in a hush. Some had their phones raised, but most had lowered them, eyes wide with awe, hands pressed to their chests. A few tourists wiped tears from their faces, their earlier curiosity transformed into something deeper, a respect that went beyond the red tunic and bearskin hat. Thomas felt the moment settle over him like a blessing and a burden all at once. He'd broken protocol, yes. He'd done the unthinkable. But in that break, he'd found a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. The rigid lines of duty had bent, just for an instant, to let compassion breathe. He felt the weight of his training, the voices of instructors past, echoing in his mind. A guardsman must be a pillar, unmoving, unshakable. And yet, here he stood, his hand in a little girl's, a tear on his cheek, and something within him whispered that perhaps the greatest strength was knowing when to bend. As he held her hand, he felt her squeeze back, a small gesture that carried more weight than 1,000 salutes. He didn't need to look at the crowd to know the impact of this moment. It was in the hush that followed, in the respectful silence that replaced the usual buzz of tourist chatter. The girl's smile grew wider, her eyes brighter than any medal he'd ever seen pinned to a uniform. She drew back slightly, her small hand releasing his. And with that gesture, the bridge between them held strong even as their hands parted. Her mother stepped forward then, her eyes red but shining. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "You don't know what this means to her." Thomas inclined his head ever so slightly, a gesture of respect that slipped past the strict guard lines, a crack in the ceremonial armor. "She's stronger than any of us," he repeated, his voice barely above the wind but heavy with conviction. The father's eyes glistened, and he placed a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. "We'll never forget this," he said, voice tight but sure. "Never." Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat, his gloved hand returning to its proper place on his rifle. He straightened slowly, resuming the stance expected of him. But in his chest, something felt lighter, freer. A soldier's burden eased by a child's courage. The tourists around them began to stir, the spell broken but not forgotten. Some reached for tissues, others exchanged quiet looks, and a few brave souls offered soft applause that faded quickly, respectful of the dignity that still hung in the air. Thomas's heart pounded, the gravity of his choice settling over him. He'd defied centuries of protocol, risking reprimand or worse. But in that risk, he'd reminded himself, and perhaps everyone watching, that behind the scarlet tunic and tall black bearskin hat was a man who knew when duty demanded more than silence. As the girl and her family stepped back, preparing to leave, Thomas felt a small warmth in his chest, a reminder that sometimes even the strongest traditions must bend to the weight of compassion. As the little girl's family moved slowly away from the guard post, her small hand still clutching the worn plush lion, Thomas straightened his posture, letting the ceremonial weight of the moment settle around him once more. He felt the warm trace of humanity in his chest, an ember that refused to be extinguished, even by centuries of protocol. But even as the crowd began to murmur again, cameras cautiously raised once more, a new sound reached Thomas's ears, the steady, deliberate rhythm of boots on the stone. It was different from the casual shuffle of tourists, different from the girl's hesitant steps. This was military, a cadence forged in discipline. A shadow crossed the ground beside him, and Thomas sensed, rather than saw, the approach of his superior. A color sergeant by the insignia, a man older than Thomas, his bearing rigid but his eyes keen. The color sergeant's uniform bore the marks of years of service, the creases and polish precise, his medals aligned with military precision. He moved with the calm authority of someone who had seen enough to know that even in the most disciplined ranks, humanity sometimes refused to be caged. Thomas didn't dare to move, though his heart beat harder than a parade drum. He kept his eyes forward, knowing the protocol. He was not to acknowledge anyone, not even a superior, unless spoken to first. Yet every nerve in his body braced for the coming storm. The color sergeant halted beside him, his boots stopping with a crisp click that echoed in the charged air. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. The crowd sensed the tension, a ripple of unease passing through them. Tourists exchanged nervous glances. Children clutched at parents' hands. Even the street musician paused mid-bow. "Lance Corporal." The sergeant's voice was low, but carried a weight that could silence a parade ground. "You know the protocol." Thomas felt the words land like stones on his chest. He had broken the unbreakable. Tradition demanded absolute stillness, unwavering silence, a symbol of the monarchy's strength and the country's pride. And he had defied it, even if for a cause that felt right in his soul. He inhaled, the summer air thick with expectation. "Yes, Sergeant," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. "I know the protocol." The sergeant's eyes flickered, just a flicker, toward the little girl now receding into the crowd, her pink dress a bright memory among the sea of onlookers. He studied Thomas's face, looking for weakness, defiance, or perhaps understanding. Thomas kept his gaze forward, but he let his voice carry the weight of his heart. "Sir, sometimes there's a duty higher than orders," he said, each word spoken with the measured calm of a man who knew he might be judged, but was ready to accept the consequences. For a long moment, the sergeant said nothing. The silence stretched thin, each second a rope pulling tighter around Thomas's chest. His mind flickered to the possibility of disciplinary action, letters of reprimand, extra drills, maybe even suspension. Yet none of that mattered, not really. He'd given the girl a moment that might stay with her forever, and in his bones, he knew he would do it again. The sergeant shifted his weight, his boots making the faintest scrape on the stone. He exhaled slowly, a sound that carried centuries of tradition, balanced against the fragile weight of a single human moment. "Understood," he said finally, his tone low, but carrying a note of something Thomas couldn't name. Respect, perhaps, or even gratitude. "Carry on, guardsman." He turned then, his eyes sweeping the crowd with the practiced precision of a soldier always on duty. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second as it met the eyes of the girl's mother, her tears still bright on her cheeks. Then, with the grace of a man who'd seen enough of life's complexities to understand that protocol was never the whole story, he resumed his patrol, his boots once again blending with the rhythm of duty. Thomas exhaled, the air leaving his lungs like a prayer. His hand tightened on his rifle, and he resumed his position, the stoic figure of the royal guard restored. Yet inside him, something had shifted. He'd bent without breaking. He'd shown strength without sacrificing compassion. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him, not with the usual curiosity or playful challenge, but with a deep, abiding respect. A few people wiped tears from their faces. Others simply stood still, as if unwilling to disturb the quiet dignity that had settled over the plaza. The little girl turned once as she walked away, her small face bright despite the shadows beneath her eyes. She lifted her plush lion and waved it gently, a silent thank you that no words could have matched. Thomas's gaze remained forward, but a warmth bloomed in his chest, stronger than any medal or promotion could bring. He had honored his uniform not by standing unbending, but by knowing that sometimes true strength meant breaking the silence to comfort a child. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the sounds of the city resumed, the rustle of feet, the low hum of conversation, the distant beat of ceremonial drums. Yet something had changed in the air, a sense of shared humanity, a reminder that even in the most rigid traditions, there was room for kindness. As the girl and her family disappeared into the crowd, the summer air felt different, warmer, softer, touched by something deeper than tradition. Tourists slowly drifted back to their cameras and conversations, but the hush of reverence lingered in the air like an echo of the moment that had just passed. Did the guard do the right thing by breaking protocol for that little girl? What would you have done in his place? Drop your answers in the comments below. Let's talk about it. And if you found this story as heartwarming as we did, please hit that like button, subscribe, and press the bell icon so you never miss a moment of compassion and courage like this one. Share this video with someone who believes that sometimes even the strongest traditions can bend for the right reason. We've got another powerful story coming tomorrow at the same time. Don't miss it. See you then.